The mind is not repaired when the day is already loud. It is shaped before sunrise. In that quiet hour, when the world is still asleep, when no one is watching, when your excuses haven't fully found their voice yet, that's where the real fight begins. Most people lose there. Not at work, not in crisis, not in public. They lose in the first minutes after waking. They reach for noise before clarity. They absorb distraction before intention. They let the world enter their mind before discipline has a chance to speak. And by the time the sun is up, their attention is already fractured. The day hasn't even begun. And internally, they are already scattered. The Stoics understood this with brutal precision. They knew that if you cannot govern your mind in the quiet, you will never govern it in chaos. That is why the early morning matters. Not because it is magical, because it is uncontested. Before the world interferes, before pressure arrives, before demands begin. You get a small window, a narrow opening where your mind can still be directed instead of dragged. In this video, we're going to walk through 7 life lessons rooted in Stoic discipline. Lessons that can reset your thinking before sunrise and change the entire direction of your day. This is not motivation. This is mental training. If you're ready to stop waking up reactive and start rising with intention, type this in the comments: I rise with intention. Let's begin. Lesson 1. Wake before excuses. Wake. When the alarm rings in the morning, something interesting happens. For a brief moment, your mind splits in two. One part of you remembers the person you promised you would become. The disciplined version, the focused version, the one who said, "Tomorrow I start differently." And the other part whispers something softer. "Just 5 more minutes." It sounds harmless. It sounds reasonable. But in that moment, a small battle begins. Not with the world, with yourself. Most people assume the real struggles of life happen later in the day, at work, in difficult conversations, in moments of pressure. But the Stoics understood something different. The first and most important victory happens in the quiet moment when you decide whether to rise or remain comfortable. Because comfort negotiates, discipline acts. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this exact moment. When he struggled to get out of bed, he would ask a simple question. Was I born to stay warm under blankets, or to do the work of being human? It's a powerful reminder. You weren't born simply to feel comfortable. You were born to act, to build, to contribute. And that begins with the first decision of the day. Waking early isn't really about productivity. It's about ownership. It's the moment you demonstrate to yourself that your intentions are stronger than your excuses. Because every morning you hesitate, something subtle happens internally. Your brain learns that promises can be delayed, that discipline can be negotiated, that comfort can overrule commitment. And those small negotiations compound. If the first promise of the day breaks, the others become easier to break as well. The workout becomes optional. The focused work becomes optional. The difficult conversation becomes optional. But when you rise immediately, before the mind begins building stories, you create a completely different pattern. You teach yourself that action comes first, that your decisions are not dependent on how you feel in the moment, that your commitments matter. And slowly, something important begins to grow. Self-trust. Because the person who wakes up when they said they would, the person who moves before excuses appear, becomes someone who can rely on themselves. And that reliability becomes the foundation of discipline. The Stoics often spoke about living in accordance with nature, and nature rises with the sun. The world does not negotiate with the morning, it simply moves forward. And when you learn to move with it, instead of resisting it, something shifts inside you. You stop starting your day reactively. You start directing it. Not every morning will feel easy. Some mornings you will feel tired. Some mornings you will stumble. That's not failure. What matters is the pattern. More mornings rising than resisting. More mornings choosing action over negotiation. Because over time, something remarkable happens. Waking early stops feeling like a struggle. It becomes part of who you are. A quiet identity shift. From someone who debates with discipline to someone who simply lives it. And once you learn to win that first battle, the battle between intention and excuse, you unlock something even more powerful. The ability to separate yourself from the chaos inside your own mind. Which brings us to the second lesson. Lesson 2. Thoughts must be observed, not obeyed. Your mind speaks constantly. From the moment you wake up, a stream of thoughts begins moving through you. Some are useful, many are not. One moment it tells you you're capable. The next it whispers that you're behind. Then it reminds you of something embarrassing from years ago. Or predicts a failure that hasn't even happened yet. The strange part is how quickly we believe these thoughts. A single idea appears. I'm not ready for this. And suddenly it feels like a fact. Another thought says, this might go wrong. And the body reacts as if danger is already present. But the Stoics discovered something powerful long before modern psychology described it. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who notices them. That distinction changes everything. Epictetus explained it clearly. People are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments they attach to those events. In other words, the suffering doesn't begin with what happens. It begins with the story the mind tells about what happened. And if every thought is treated like truth, that story becomes your reality. Most people never question the voice in their head. The mind says, you're going to fail, and they hesitate. It says, they probably don't like you, and they withdraw. It says, this is too difficult, and they stop trying. The thought arrives, and behavior immediately follows. But early in the morning, before the noise of the world takes over, something different becomes possible. You can watch the mind. You can sit in the quiet and observe what it's doing, the doubts, the predictions, the fears. Instead of becoming tangled in them, you see them moving through you like weather passing through the sky. Present, but temporary. Visible, but not permanent. This is where freedom begins. Not when difficult thoughts disappear, but when you stop treating every thought like a command. Because the mind evolved to protect you, not to guide you toward greatness. It scans constantly for risk. It exaggerates potential danger. It prefers safety over growth. Which means if you obey every thought automatically, you will often remain small. You will avoid risks that matter. You will retreat when uncertainty appears. You will hesitate whenever fear speaks loudly enough. Observing your thoughts interrupts that pattern. It creates space. Instead of reacting, you begin choosing. You can ask simple questions. Is this thought accurate? Is it useful? Is it helping me move forward? Often the answer is no. Often the mind is simply replaying an old fear or inventing a problem that doesn't yet exist. But once you see that clearly, the thought loses some of its power. It becomes just that, a thought, not a command. This is why the quiet morning matters so much. Before the day fills your mind with external noise, you get the chance to notice the internal one. You sit, you breathe, you watch. And slowly you begin to recognize patterns. The same fears returning again and again, the same doubts wearing different disguises, the same exaggerated worries trying to convince you they are urgent. But once you see them clearly, something shifts. You stop obeying automatically. You begin deciding. And that decision, the ability to choose your response instead of being dragged by your thinking, is one of the greatest forms of mental freedom. But observing the mind requires something that modern life rarely gives us. silence. And that leads directly to the third lesson. Lesson 3. Silence is training. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. The moment a quiet space appears, they rush to fill it. Music in the background, a podcast while walking, notifications, messages, endless scrolling. Noise has become the default setting of modern life. Not because it is necessary, because it is easier. Silence does something many people would rather avoid. It removes distraction. And when distraction disappears, you are left face to face with your own mind. For many people, that is unsettling. Thoughts appear that have been ignored all week. Old worries surface. Questions you've been avoiding start asking themselves. So the instinct is simple. Fill the space. Add more input. Stay busy enough that you never have to sit still with yourself. But the Stoics viewed silence very differently. To them, silence wasn't empty. It was training. It was where clarity developed. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, once observed that humans were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, not just to listen more to others, but to listen inwardly. Because beneath the constant chatter of the mind, there is a quieter voice, a more stable one, the voice of reason. But that voice cannot be heard in constant noise. It appears only when the noise fades. This is why the early morning matters so much. Before sunrise, the world is quiet. There are no demands yet, no interruptions, no immediate pressure to react. You are simply present with yourself. At first, that silence can feel uncomfortable. The mind races. It looks for something to grab, something to solve, something to distract itself with. But if you stay in that quiet moment, even for just a few minutes, something begins to change. The mental urgency slows down, the noise settles, and what seemed chaotic begins to organize itself. You start seeing thoughts more clearly. Priorities become easier to recognize. Problems that felt overwhelming begin to look manageable. Silence does not eliminate difficulty. It removes the confusion around it. That is why it functions like mental training. When you learn to sit calmly in quiet moments, you build resilience. You prove to yourself that you can exist without constant stimulation, that you can think clearly without needing immediate input, that you can remain steady without external distraction. And that steadiness carries into the rest of your day. When stress appears later, when conflict happens, when pressure rises, you are not instantly thrown off balance. Because you have practiced calm. You have trained your mind to remain stable without noise. Even creativity begins to appear in those quiet spaces. Solutions emerge, ideas connect, insights surface that were buried beneath distraction, not because silence magically creates answers, but because it clears the mental clutter that hides them. You begin noticing what actually matters, what deserves your attention, what can safely be ignored. 5 minutes of real silence can sometimes do more for your clarity than an hour of scattered activity. And over time, something surprising happens. Silence stops feeling uncomfortable. It becomes something you look forward to. A reset, a mental clearing, a place where your mind can return to itself before the world pulls it in every direction. This is why the Stoics valued solitude and quiet reflection, not as escape, but as preparation. Preparation for the complexity of life. Because when you can sit calmly in silence, you become far harder to shake when the noise returns. And once that clarity begins to grow, you start seeing something else more clearly, where much of your suffering actually comes from. Which brings us to the fourth lesson. Lesson 4. Most suffering is self-manufactured. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: a large portion of the suffering we experience is not created by events, it is created by the mind, not intentionally, but habitually. Something happens, a mistake, a criticism, a delay, an unexpected problem, and within seconds, The mind begins building a narrative around it. Not just what happened, but what it means, what it says about you, what it might lead to. And suddenly a small event becomes a large emotional storm. Marcus Aurelius understood this clearly. He wrote that when we are distressed by external events, the pain does not come from the event itself. It comes from our interpretation of it. That idea is simple, but if you really absorb it, it changes how you move through life. Because most people wake up and immediately begin manufacturing mental pressure. They replay yesterday's problems. They anticipate conflicts that may never happen. They imagine worst-case scenarios and then emotionally react to situations that do not yet exist. Before the day has even begun, the mind is already carrying weight that reality never asked it to carry. Think about how often this happens. A message goes unanswered for a few hours. The mind invents 10 possible explanations. A small mistake happens at work. The mind immediately projects failure into the future. Someone looks distracted during a conversation. The mind assumes rejection. In many cases, the event itself is neutral, but the interpretation turns it into suffering. The Stoics called this a failure to accept reality as it is. Not passively, but clearly. Life will always contain difficulty. Plans change, people disappoint, things break, opportunities appear and disappear. None of that is optional. But the additional suffering we layer on top, the frustration, the resistance, the endless mental replaying, often is. When you wake before sunrise and sit with your thoughts quietly, you begin noticing how quickly the mind tries to create drama. You see how fast it jumps from a simple fact to a catastrophic interpretation. And that awareness gives you a powerful option. You can pause. You can ask yourself, is this situation actually as serious as my mind is making it? Or am I adding unnecessary suffering? Often the answer becomes clear. The situation might still be difficult, but it is rarely as overwhelming as the mind first claims. And the moment you stop exaggerating the problem internally, your ability to handle it improves dramatically. Acceptance plays a key role here. Acceptance is often misunderstood. It does not mean liking everything that happens. It does not mean surrendering your goals or abandoning effort. It simply means recognizing reality without fighting it emotionally. Once reality is accepted, energy becomes available again. Instead of resisting what has already occurred, you can respond intelligently to what is happening now. You lose a job. That is painful. But the story that your life is ruined forever, that is added suffering. A relationship ends. That is real grief. But the belief that you will never recover, that is mental amplification. Life already contains enough difficulty. There is no need to manufacture extra. The morning practice of reflection helps interrupt that habit. You begin the day by noticing what your mind is creating, and you gently separate reality from interpretation. What actually happened versus the story built around it. Once you see the difference, your reactions begin to change. You feel emotions without drowning in them. You acknowledge problems without exaggerating them. You respond to events instead of escalating them internally. Over time, this becomes a form of freedom. Life still presents challenges, but the unnecessary suffering begins to fade. You stop turning small problems into large mental battles, and instead, you begin directing your energy towards something more constructive, your actions, which leads directly to the next lesson. Lesson 5. Control the body to calm the mind. Most people try to solve mental chaos with more thinking. They analyze their anxiety. They argue with their worries. They try to logically convince themselves to calm down. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't, because the mind and the body are not separate systems. They are one. When the body is tense, the mind becomes tense. When the nervous system is in alarm mode, the mind produces alarm thoughts. You cannot expect a calm mind inside a chaotic body. The Stoics understood this intuitively. They didn't only train their philosophy, they trained their bodies. They walked long distances. They endured cold and heat. They practiced voluntary discomfort. Not because suffering was noble, but because physical discipline creates mental stability. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. One of the fastest ways to interrupt imagined suffering is to return attention to the body. The body lives in the present moment. The mind rarely does. The mind jumps between past and future. The body remains here, breathing, moving, existing. When you bring attention back to it, you anchor yourself again in reality. That's why simple physical actions can immediately change your mental state. Take breathing as an example. When anxiety rises, breathing becomes shallow and fast. This signals danger to the nervous system. But when you deliberately slow your breath, something remarkable happens. The nervous system receives a new signal: safety. Within minutes, the mind begins calming down, not through force, through biology. Try this. Inhale slowly for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 6 seconds. Repeat it 3 or 4 times. Notice how your thoughts begin to slow. This isn't mystical, it's mechanical. Your physiology changes your psychology. Movement works the same way. When you are stuck in your head, replaying worries or overthinking a decision, the fastest exit is often physical movement. A walk, stretching, push-ups, anything that shifts your attention back into your body. Athletes experience this constantly. They call it being in the zone. In that state, thinking disappears, action takes over, presence returns. The Stoics practiced something similar. Cold exposure was one of their tools, not as punishment, as training. Cold water shocks the body. But when you remain calm in that moment, you teach your nervous system something powerful. Discomfort is not danger. You learn to experience intensity without panic. Over time, this translates into emotional resilience. Stressful situations stop feeling overwhelming because your body has learned how to stay steady. Morning is the perfect time to practice this connection. Before the mind fills with demands, you engage the body intentionally. Stretch, move, take a cold shower, walk outside. It doesn't need to be extreme, it just needs to be deliberate. These actions send a message to your brain: I am awake, I am in control. The day begins with discipline, and that message matters. Because every physical action in the morning becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. Each time you move when you don't feel like it, each time you choose discipline over comfort, you strengthen the internal belief that you are capable of directing your life. This is how self-trust grows, not through motivation, through repeated action. Your body becomes proof that you can act despite resistance, proof that you can override impulse, proof that you are not controlled by momentary feelings. And when the body learns discipline, the mind follows. Calm becomes easier, focus becomes stronger, decision-making becomes clearer, all because you began with something simple: movement, breath, control, which prepares you for the next lesson. One of the most powerful habits the Stoics practiced: deciding your day before it begins. Lesson 6. The day is decided before it begins. Most people don't start their day, they fall into it. The alarm rings, the phone gets checked, messages appear, emails arrive, notifications begin stacking up. Within minutes, the outside world has already taken control of their attention. By the time the morning is halfway over, they feel behind. Not because the day was difficult, because the day started without intention. The Stoics approached mornings differently. They believed the mind should prepare itself before the world begins demanding things from it. Seneca spoke often about this preparation, not as a productivity trick, as a form of mental armor. Because the day will always contain difficulty, Unexpected problems, unreasonable people, delays, disappointments, pressure, none of that can be avoided. But how you meet those moments can be decided in advance. The Stoics practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of possible difficulties. This wasn't pessimism, it was preparation. Instead of pretending the day would go perfectly, they mentally walked through the challenges that might appear. A difficult conversation, a mistake, an inconvenience, a delay. And they asked themselves one simple question: how will I respond when this happens? Notice the wording, not if it happens, when it happens. Because expecting difficulty makes you steadier when it arrives. You are not shocked. You are not thrown off balance. You simply respond the way you already decided to respond. That is the power of intention. Without intention, the day controls you. With intention, you control how you move through the day. This does not require a complicated routine. In fact, the process can be very simple. In the quiet of the early morning, before distractions appear, ask yourself 3 questions. What truly matters today? What challenges might appear? Who do I want to be when those challenges happen? These questions align your attention. They force clarity before chaos arrives. Maybe the day contains an important task that you've been avoiding. You decide now that you will begin it first. Maybe there will be a stressful meeting. You decide now that you will stay calm and listen instead of reacting. Maybe distractions will appear. You decide now that you will protect your focus. By making these decisions early, something subtle changes. You stop drifting through the day. You begin directing it. Of course, the day will not unfold exactly as planned. It never does. Unexpected things will still happen. But when your mind has already aligned itself with your priorities and values, you adapt from stability instead of confusion. You are no longer reacting blindly. You are responding intentionally. And this creates a sense of control that most people rarely experience. Not control over circumstances, control over yourself. At the end of the day, the difference becomes obvious. One person feels scattered, pulled in every direction, drained by constant reaction. Another feels steady, focused, aligned with their values. The external events may have been identical. The difference was the beginning. One person allowed the day to start them. The other started the day. And that small difference compounds, morning after morning, decision after decision, until the direction of a life begins to change. But there is one final lesson that ties everything together. Because discipline, preparation, and clarity do not produce instant applause, real progress rarely looks dramatic. In fact, it often looks invisible, which leads to the final lesson. Lesson 7. Winning happens quietly. The world celebrates loud victories, big announcements, public success, moments that can be shared, posted, and applauded. But those moments are rarely where the real work happens. Real transformation is quiet. It happens in the hours nobody sees, early mornings, repetition, decisions made without an audience. The Stoics understood this deeply. They weren't interested in appearing disciplined, they were interested in becoming disciplined. Marcus Aurelius ruled the largest empire in the world, yet in his private writings he reminded himself of something simple. Stop talking about what a good person should be. Be one, no performance, no announcement, just consistent action. This idea applies to everything. The person who eventually writes the book didn't become a writer on the day it was published. They became a writer during hundreds of mornings spent writing quietly. The athlete standing on a podium didn't become strong on the day of the competition. They became strong during thousands of unseen training sessions. The same principle applies to your life. Every morning you rise early, every time you observe your thoughts instead of obeying them, every time you choose discipline over comfort. You are casting a vote for the person you are becoming. One vote seems small, but repeated daily, those votes change the outcome of your life. Most people underestimate this because progress often feels invisible at first. You wake early for a week and nothing dramatic happens. You practice discipline for a month and your life doesn't instantly transform. So the temptation appears to stop, to return to old habits, to assume nothing is changing. But change is happening, quietly, beneath the surface. Just like compound interest grows invisibly before it becomes obvious. Each small decision strengthens the next one. Each act of discipline reinforces the identity you are building. Over time, the pattern becomes undeniable. You are no longer someone who tries to be disciplined. You are someone who is disciplined. And that identity influences every area of your life. You think differently, you act differently, you make decisions differently. But here is the key truth most people miss. The satisfaction cannot come from applause. It must come from alignment. Alignment between your values and your actions, between what you say you want and what you actually do. Because external recognition is unpredictable. Sometimes people notice your effort, often they don't. But if recognition is the only motivation, discipline becomes fragile. It disappears the moment the audience does. Stoic philosophy removes that dependency. You act well because it is the right thing to do. You train your mind because mastery matters. You wake early because you value the clarity it brings, not because someone is watching, but because you are. And that quiet accountability becomes powerful. You no longer need constant motivation. You simply keep showing up. Morning after morning, choice after choice. And eventually something remarkable happens. The habits that once required effort become natural. Waking early stops feeling like a battle. Observing your thoughts becomes automatic. Responding calmly becomes your default. You become the person who lives deliberately, not perfectly, but intentionally. And the most important part is this: the world may only see the results later, but you will know exactly where they came from. From the quiet mornings, from the decisions nobody noticed, from the discipline built before sunrise. That is where winning really happens. Not in the spotlight, but in the silence. The sun will rise tomorrow. It always does. The question is whether you will rise with it, because the mind is not fixed when the world becomes loud. It is fixed in the quiet moments before the noise begins. When the alarm rings and the first decision appears. When you observe your thoughts instead of obeying them. When you sit in silence long enough to hear yourself clearly. When you stop manufacturing suffering. When you move your body and calm your mind. When you decide who you will be before the day decides for you. And when you continue doing these things quietly, consistently, without needing applause, that is how a mind is rebuilt. One morning at a time. Not through motivation, through discipline. So tomorrow morning, when the alarm rings, remember this: you have a choice. To drift into the day, or to rise and take command of it. And if you're committed to rising with intention, leave this in the comments. I rise, I decide, I win. And if you're walking this path of discipline and clarity, subscribe and stay with us. Because this is only the beginning. The strongest minds are built early, before sunrise.